Alright, welcome back to the second question. The second question said the bearing of Q from P is 150. The bearing of Q from P is 150. That means we have P already. We are taking Q from P, covering 150 degrees. So let's assume this is our P. This is our P. And then north, east, south, and west. So we want to get 150 so that we can get Q. We start moving from north to east. It's 90. So since this is not drawn to scale, 150 should be around the second quadrant, which will be between 90 and 180. Now the distance they said is if Q and R are 24 and 32 kilometers respectively. This means that Q is 24 kilometers and R is 32 kilometers. So it says the bearing of Q from P. So Q will take the distance of Q, which is what? 24. So we'll call this 24 kilometers, and then it will help us get to what? Q. Now let's look at the next statement. The next statement said, and the bearing of P from R. That means this P that we have gotten, there is a point R which we have to take its own bearing from, but at what? 0.15 degrees. Now, what is the distance of R? The distance of R is 32 kilometers. So 32 is supposed to be longer than 24. So let's start taking it from this point to get to R. So recall that this should be longer than 24. So this will give us our what? 32 kilometers. Now, R is on a bearing of what? Is having a bearing of this to get to P, which is 0.15. So since it is 0.15, we'll take it from north to east. So we just have it here, 0.15 degrees. Okay, so we have drawn the diagram. The only thing now, we have to connect R to Q. So we just take a straight line to get to that point. Alright, so that's our triangle for the bearings and the points involved. Okay, so what do they also ask us to look for? They say we should represent, okay, we've answered I, so this is I. And then the next thing they say, we should calculate the distance between Q and R. Between Q and R. So this distance, we don't know it. And since it is opposite P, we can call it small letter p. Right? Okay, so since this distance is opposite P, we have to find the angle that is at P here. This angle at P. Now, looking at this point, this is 0.15. This angle is alternating this angle. So here too is 15. Then this angle entirely is 150 degrees according to the question. But the distance from north to south is 180. And it stopped here. So what is this remainder? This remainder now will be 180 minus 150, which will give you what? 30 degrees. Right? So this place becomes what? 30 degrees. So the entire angle here at P will give you 15 plus 30, which is 45 degrees. Okay, So let's find P now, since we have gotten the angle relating to the distance RQ. Okay, to get that, we're going to be using cosine rule. And cosine rule say P square is equals to the side square, 32 square plus 24 square minus 2 into the two sides, then times cos the angle of P, which is what? 45 degrees. Okay, so this is going to be equal to 32 square will give you 1024 plus 24 square will give you 576 minus 2. 32 times 24 will give you 768 times cos 45 is 0.7071. All right, let's continue. So let's add these two values together now. This one will give you 0, this one will give you 0, this with that 1 make this 6 and 1, then minus, let's multiply 2 times 768 times 0.7071. 2 times 768 times 0.7071 to give us 1086.1056. Okay, so let's subtract that from 1600 to give us 513.89. But this is P square, we are looking for P, so P tends to square root of 513.89, which is equal to 22.669. So your P equals 22.669 kilometers. All right, so recall that this P represents the distance they asked us to look for, which is QR. So it's equals to QR. So we have gotten the distance. And they say it should be correct. Look at it. They say correct to 2 decimal places. So we have to correct this to 2 decimal places. So QR now, which is equals to P, is equals to 22.67 kilometers to 2 dp. All right, let's do the last question. The last question said find the bearing of R from Q, correct to the nearest degree. So let's analyze the diagram now to know how to find the third question, bearing. Okay, so they say we are to look for the bearing of R from Q. Now, whenever you want to find bearing, let's put this indication. You have to start moving from north down to the point where the place they are asking you to look for the bearing from the point you are is. So I have to move from north down to this point. So this will be the bearing of R from Q. But the question is, what is this value? Yes, that's where the problem comes. Now, how do we get this value? We know that this value is related to this angle. The total value will give you 270 degrees. But how do you get this value? We will call this value Y. How do we get Y? how do we get y, this portion? Now, let's start analyzing again. What is this angle? If we get this entire angle, let's call it alpha. Then we can just say this angle minus this angle minus this angle to give us this angle, right? What it means is y will be equals to alpha minus, let's call this one x, alpha minus x. So let's see, if this is 30, this is also what? 30. And if the entire portion is 90, it means x here is 60, right? So x is already 60, so y is equals to alpha minus 60. But we don't know alpha, so let's look for alpha. How do we get alpha now? So we say sine alpha divided by 32 is equals to, let's use this one that we know, sine 45 all over p. So sine alpha will be equals to sine 45 times 32 divided by p. Okay, sine 45. So let's find sine 45. Sine 45 is equals to 0.7071 times 32 divided by our p value is 22.67. But we don't always use this final answer, we use the original value. So we go back to 669. Please don't forget, it's very important, use the original value instead of the approximate. So sine alpha will be equals to, let's multiply this value, so it will give you 22.6274 divided by 22.669. 0.9982. So alpha will be, sine alpha will be equals 0.9982, right? So if we divide both sides by sine, so alpha becomes sine inverse of 0.9982. So let's find the sine inverse of that value. It will give you 86.53 degrees. So if we get 86.53 degrees, let's go back to this our equation now. Let's get the value of y. So y will be equals to alpha minus 60, which is 86.53 minus 60. So it will give you 26.53 degrees. So now that we have gotten y, we can then get the bearing. So the bearing will be equals to the bearing of r from q will be equals to 270 degrees minus, remember we said to get you say 270 degrees minus y, right? So let's minus y is 26.53. and subtract it. So we have 243.47 degrees. But the question said that we should find the bearing of r from q correct to the nearest degree. So we can put it as this, 243.5 degrees. That's the bearing of r from q. Thank you and see you in the next video.